Bemidbar is always read the Shabbos before Shavuos. Okay, this week is Shavuos on Tuesday night. By the way, on Tuesday, if anybody is in town, you can please come to support me in the court case I'll be in on June 11th. You can come and be supportive of me by going down to the Superior Court and standing with me. I feel like I've been targeted and trying to be intimidated and bullied. And you can contact me about that more information. But Tuesday night is Shavuos. So I'll be spending the whole day in court preparing for the receiving of the Torah. But I'll be in court standing up to my values, the Torah, Am Yisrael, Jewish people, Am Yisrael Chai, being a proud supporter of Tzahal, of the Israeli Defense Force. And then on Shavuos night, we'll have a small meal in the yeshiva after davening, which will probably be around 8:30. And then we're going to, at 12:30, we're going to gather. 12:30 in the morning, we're going to gather and study until we daven at around 5 a.m. So, and then the next day we'll have a Yizkor service. People come and we'll have regular davening for the second day of Yom Tov. So everybody's welcome to study with us Torah all night long. But this Shabbos we read Parashas Bemidbar, and it's always the case that Bemidbar is read the Shabbos before Shavuos. Why is it always the case that Bemidbar is read the Shabbos before Shavuos? And that's because by a decree of Ezra, the curses have to be read 2 weeks before the last Shabbos of the year, 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, and 2 weeks before Shavuos. So there are two curses in the Torah, two sections of curses. And that's how we read it. We read them 2 weeks before the Shabbos. 2 Shabbos is before Shavuos, and 2 Shabbos is before Bereshit. And so, but there's a bigger discussion about it. So let me read some of the comments first from the Chidushei Arim. So the Chidushei Arim says, but I'm just reading the commentary. Numbers chapter 1. So it says, it's a principle shekavu kadmonenu that our holy ancestors established, that we should always read the portion of Bamidbar which has the counting of the Jewish people, Minyan Yisrael, the counting of the Jewish people, Minu, Kodem Atzeres, prior to Shavuos, Ve'atzru, to stop, after Bechukosai. And this is a reform of Ezra. And this is based upon the idea, the Gemara says, Tichwa Shana Ve'kilosea, the year should conclude with its curses. And therefore, we don't want that. We want the year to end with its curses, but we don't want curses to be the very last thing. So we want it to be the very last thing before the last thing. And so therefore, we do one passage between Bechukosai, which has the curses, and between Shavuos. And because Shavuos is the Rosh Hashanah for fruits and for trees. And also, we do one parasha between Kisavo and Rosh Hashanah, and that's Nitzavim, because Kisavo has the curses in it. There's also the idea, it's not 100% true that sometimes if there is a Rosh Hashanah which comes on Thursday and it's a leap year, then we'll read Parashas Nasa prior to Shavuos. But other than that, it'll always be that Bamidbar is read before Shavuos. And what's the reason? Is because, says the Chidushei Arim, it says in Parashas Bamidbar, in Ish al deglo ba'usos, each man according to his degel with his signs. Yesterday in our Torah study, we discussed that Rashi has an unusual understanding of the word degel. Almost every other commentary that I've seen sees degel as a flag, and Rashi says degel is like your division, that you have to go to your division. And that's the way Chidushei Arim understands it. Ish al deglo ba'usos. Every person, every man needs to be in his appropriate place. And that's the commandment of Hagbalah, of being in our, separating before we come to Matan Torah, before we come to receiving the Torah. Everybody needs to be in their Hagbala, in their we have to know our specific place in this world before we come to receive the Torah at Sinai. That's the Chidushei Arim, and Sfas Emes writes, also the Ger Rebbe writes, that in the Shabbos before Shavuos, we need to do preparation for the receiving of the Torah, because this was the Shabbos. And what's the reason why the Shabbos for Shavuos we have to do preparation? Because Shabbos is one of the mitzvos, one of the three mitzvos, or maybe some more, depending on your count, that was given at Mara, and Mara was before the giving of the Torah at Sinai. And so therefore Shabbos itself is a preparation for receiving the Torah. As it says that the people rested on the seventh day. They rested on the seventh day. We had in Parshas Peshalach the mitzvah of Shabbos, the commandment not to gather the man on Shabbos. And from there, Misham Nasu Har Sinai. From there, they traveled to Mount Sinai. So some say, says the Sfas Emes, that they traveled actually on Shabbos itself, and some say that they traveled on the Sunday after Shabbos. But what it means is they traveled with the power of Shabbos. With the power of Shabbos, they traveled to Mount Sinai. With the power of Shabbos. Then it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael, the Jewish people camped, Ke'ish echad b'lev echad, like one man is one heart. That comes from the power of Shabbos. That on the Shabbos, the Jewish people had tremendous unity. And that's why it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged ahar, the Jewish people camped under the mountain. And the Gemara says like one heart and one mind. Because they had the power of Shabbos. When we celebrate Shabbos, we have the unity of this Shabbos. And that's what it means, that they came to the Midbar Sinai. Meaning to say, what does it mean, Vayavo Midbar Sinai? They came to the Sinai wilderness to receive the Torah. Meaning to say, says the Sfas Emes, from the aspect of the wilderness, they came to Sinai. Wilderness is the nullification that we're out there in the expanse, and we recognize that everything else is meaningless except to fulfill the will of Hashem. And every single one of the Jewish people has this idea on Shabbos, because on Shabbos, we're fulfilling this idea that we're recognizing that everything else is meaningless, is nullified vis-a-vis to serve the will of God. Because on Shabbos, every one of us amongst the Jewish people is not working. And so therefore, we're in essence saying that all of our lives are subservient to Hashem's will. So on Shabbos, we are in a certain sense, in a small sense, fulfilling this aspect. And so therefore, Shabbos is the preparation for the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And so too, it says in the Dayenu passage, which we say on Seder night, V'nasalanu es HaShabbos v'kervanu ifnei Har Sinai. God gave us the Shabbos. Remember, we say this in Dayenu. God brought us the Shabbos, gave us the Shabbos, and then brought us close to Sinai. Meaning to say that Shabbos is what gets us to Sinai. And so too, it says amongst the sages, this is the reason why circumcision is done. You see this, April? This is the reason why circumcision is done on the 8th day, because we want to make sure that the boy has at least one Shabbos prior to getting the circumcision. That the Shabbos comes and brings us to the mitzvahs. That Shabbos comes and brings us to Mount Sinai. Shabbos comes, brings us to the mitzvah of a bris. Shabbos is what comes and brings us to the spiritual place we need to go. And that's the essence of why the Shabbos was given prior to Mount Sinai. And this is why we need to have, this Shabbos needs to be about preparing for the receiving of the Torah at Sinai. It doesn't have a specific name. It's not called Shabbos HaGadol, although some say that every Shabbos before Yom Tov is called Shabbos HaGadol. But this is the special Shabbos called the Shabbos before Mount Sinai, because Shabbos is what brings us to Mount Sinai. So next approach, let me just pause for a second and see if anybody had a question. Okay, no questions. The next approach comes from the Divrei Yechezkel. He says there's another reason why we read Parshas Bemidbar before Shavuos. We saw one reason was because it's the Shabbos after the curses, and also the Shabbos of counting the Jewish people to know where we stand in the world. And then we saw another approach is because is that Shabbos is what brought us to Sinai. But now we see another explanation from the Divrei Yechezkel. He says another reason why the sages instituted Rashi says, at the first Rashi on the parsha, mitoch chibasam monel tam kosha, because the beginning of Bemidbar is another census of the Jewish people. So ask the question of everybody wants to know. This is the third census we're having already. Why does Hashem need to count us so many times? Three census or three censi, I don't know, three censum in 1 year? Why? So it is, Rashi says, mitochi botam moneh otam kol shah, because God's great, tremendous love for the Jewish people, He counts us at all moments. And the Rambam says about this verse, Hamotzi b'mispar tzavam l'kulam shemos yikra, that God takes out by the number of the hosts, meaning God takes out all the hosts from heaven, and God gives them all a name, because thing reflects its inner essence. And so therefore, before the Jewish people can prepare themselves to stand at Sinai, they need to get connected to their source by the names of the tribes, the holy tribes, and the princes. Meaning to say, before we could stand at Sinai, we needed to know who we are, our names, and where we stood. And the princes stood there, and the princes were the leaders of the generation. And only afterwards were we able to come to the receiving of the Torah. Meaning to say that in this, what Bamidbar is doing is saying this portion is taking us out, standing us in a place, giving us our names, showing us who our names, who our sources are. We need to know that before we can have the rights to stand at Sinai and receive the Torah. Another explanation about the connection between Bamidbar and Shavuos is basically said by Rabbi Zevin, Rabbi Shlomo Zevin. He wrote Moadim Balacham, many things, and the editor of Encyclopedia Talmudit, an absolute genius, Chabad Chassid, who lived in Yerushalayim. And he said, whoever fulfills the Torah, when we fulfill the Torah, what we're actually in essence doing is taking, like Ben Gurion said, letting the desert bloom. That was what Ben Gurion said, let the desert bloom. So when we fulfill the Torah, what we're doing is we're taking the desert and making it bloom, turning the desert, the desolate desert, into the Garden of Eden. And so that's what we're doing we're taking the Bamidbar and we're turning it into the Sinai, into the blooming Garden of Eden. That's what the Torah can do. The Torah can transfer it. Yes.
Were these?
All right. There's another hint to why we read it first, and this comes from the Rav Harav Shoham, and he says there's another reason why this passage of Bamidbar is always read before Shavuot, which is the time of the giving of the Torah, to teach you that if a person wants to receive, this is a well-known midrash, if a person wants to receive, to be worthy of receiving the Torah, he has to make himself ownerless like a wilderness, meaning to say that he has to be humble, which is like the wilderness is nothing. And he has to think to himself that just like a wilderness is nothing to be arrogant about and is lacking everything, so too is he, that this person is lacking and he's like a midbar. So if you want to make yourself worthy of receiving the Torah, make yourself wilderness. The Rabbeinu, the Rabbi Yisrael Mirajin, says that he used to say Dvar Torah every Shabbos meal, but on the Shabbos for Shavuos, he never said a Dvar Torah. Why was that? He said, I feel like on this Shabbos, the Yisrael of Rajin said, on this Shabbos, I feel like a field that's been harvested. And so therefore, the field has been harvested, but it's not yet been, I'm trying to figure out the proper way to say it. It says like a field that's halfway to the harvest season. Meaning it's been harvested, they planted, but there's nothing to do in the field. Meaning the new crops are finished, the old crops are finished, and the new crops have not yet come in. And so he said, I finished all my Torah to share. I'm waiting for the new one to come in. That's what he said. Okay, so now we have, before we go into the Parsha, just tell you something else about the specialness of the season we're in. Now, Friday is Rosh Chodesh, and the day after Rosh Chodesh is called Yom HaMiyuchas, the special day, the special day. So the day, this Shabbos, therefore, is called Yom HaMiyuchas, the special day. Why is this Shabbos called a special day? What's so special about it? So the answer is that the day after Rosh Chodesh Sivan is called Yom HaMiyuchas, and what's the reason why it's called Yom HaMiyuchas? So the Magen Avraham and Or Chaim Siman Taftzei Tzadi Daled says that this is called Yom HaMiyuchas, even though there's nothing special about it. It's called a special day, even though there's nothing special about it. So, meaning to say, it's a name that was given to it because it's in between other holy days. Because the first day of Sivan is Rosh Chodesh. The first day is Rosh Chodesh. The day 3, 4, and 5 is what's called the 3 days of preparation for the Torah. Day 6 and 7 is Shavuos, and the day in between is the special day. So it's called a special day because there's nothing special about it. This is what Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin says. So he says, Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin says something else. Says, why is it called a special day? Specifically because this day doesn't attribute to itself anything special. Oh, there's a day that doesn't call itself special? That's the special day. That's the special day. Only the special day would never call itself special. So that's why it's called the special day, because it's surrounded by all these special days, and yet it doesn't call itself special. It doesn't say, oh, we should make it to 4 days of preparation for Sinai. It doesn't make it so. Kol Yuchos, so its whole specialness is because the day before it is Rosh Chodesh and the day after is the 3 days of preparation. That anybody who doesn't see in themselves something special, he says, I only see the specialness after me or before me. That's special. Somebody recognizes their place in the world, that they recognize that they come from greatness and that greatness is following them. That's the special one. That's the Yom HaMiyuchas. And Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin gives a mashal, gives a parable for this. What's his parable? His parable is as follows. There was a king that invited for himself 4 of the best young people in his kingdom, and these are the up and coming artists. And he says, I want you to draw the walls of my palace. So the artists divide up the work that each one of them would draw. So the artists divide up their work, and each one of them decided that each one would draw 1 wall in every room. So they did the work to the best of their abilities, and they worked very hard, and they had beautiful colors, except from one of them who didn't want to do anything. One of them would just sit there, and he was just making calculations and measurements, but he never actually painted anything. It sounds like my contractor. No, I'm just kidding. So they didn't understand, his friends didn't understand what he was doing. When they completed their work, this one comes with, what did he do? He came with a beautiful mirror, and he covered up the 4th wall with a mirror. And so therefore, on his wall, you could see the reflections of all the other walls. That's the greatness of Yom HaMiyuchas. Meaning to say, it's just a reflection of all the days before it and all the days after it. You follow that beautiful parable? You follow that beautiful parable? Everybody follow that? Guy, you like that one? Yeah. It's a day to be reflecting all the days around you. Beautiful. So, okay, and now we say Another reason why it's called the Yom HaMiyuchas is because it's the day between Rosh Chodesh and between the 3 days of preparation. And so therefore, since it's in between two festival days, they made it like its own festival. And another reason is because on this day, it was said to us prior to Matan Torah that you will be a kingdom of, because it was told to us on this day, a verse. What was the verse that was told to us on this day? You shall be for me a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation, and you shall be for me a treasure. So therefore, for this reason, it was called Yom HaMiyuchos, because this is the day that Hashem told us we're going to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I want to say another idea, which is not in the Sefer in front of me. Another idea is that we read a parashas Bemidbar prior to the giving of the Torah, prior to Mount Sinai. And in parashas Bemidbar, it says in the book that everyone came, it says in the Torah, that everyone should come to Moshe Rabbeinu. Everyone had to come. It says, Vayisyaldu al mishpachotam. They came with their families. And Rashi says, they brought Heviu Sifrei Yichuseihem. They brought their books that established their lineage. They brought their books that established their lineage. And that's what they're doing on this day. They're establishing their lineage of where they come from. And so that's also what was going on in this week's in Yom HaMiyuchos. This is the time where they're establishing their lineage. Now we go to the first verse of the portion, chapter 1, verse 1 of the book of Bemidbar. We want to start chapter 1 of Bemidbar. Yeah, 1. The first one. What? No, in the afternoon we're in chapter 2, but now we're just hitting highlights. So we want to just say about the first verse, the word from Rav Elimelech. Because we always love to share explanations of Rav Elimelech. So Rav Elimelech says as follows. He says in the verse, what's the verse? Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe. God spoke to Moshe. Bemidbar Sinai be'Ohel Moed. God spoke to Moshe in the Sinai wilderness in the Ohel Moed. Bemidbar Sinai in the Sinai wilderness. This is a remez. This says Rav Elimelech. What does the Sinai wilderness hint to? This is a hint to a person that a person needs to be humble in his own eyes. In our own eyes, humble like Sinai. Now, what did Hashem do? How did Hashem select Mount Sinai? Hashem rejected the tallest mountains in selecting which mountain to choose and chose Mount Sinai, which is the smallest amongst all of them. But this is such an important point that Rav Elimelech makes. God forbid that because you have this humility, you'll come to a depression or a sadness as a result of this humility. And because when we're sad, that prevents the divine presence from resting upon us. So therefore, the Torah commands us to always be with joy, because the divine presence will only rest from joy. And the joy will come from feeling the festival. And that's why it says, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai be'Ohel Moed. So in the tent of the Moed, meaning to say that a person has to come from this place of humility to a place of the canopy of the festival, meaning to say to a place of joy. That's what Rav Elimelech is saying, is that the humility brings us to joy and not to low self-esteem, but to happiness, that we become a servant of Hashem. That's how Rav Elimelech reads this first verse. I also want to say, it's always very moving to me to read the Midrashim about which is exactly the mountain of Sinai. And I around a year ago at this time, I traveled to Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, and I saw the different versions, and all the mountains that are potentially Sinai, none of them are these giant mountains. None of them would really have any significance if it weren't for Sinai. And so it's very clear that Mount Sinai is not anything close to, let's say, Mount Everest. It's just a very humble mountain, but a mountain, a very special mountain, which our ancestors stood at, and I'm always grateful to Hashem for having had the opportunity to write a Torah scroll, which I just finished last week, which was started at Mount Sinai. Yes, we have a couple of questions. First of all, we have in the first verse in Bemidbar. Okay, so another explanation. This comes from the Or HaChaim. It says, "Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'Midbar Sinai b'Ol Moed b'Echad l'Chodesh Hasheni." When the Torah first mentions the place Midbar Sinai, and that is a general marker, and then it says the Ol Moed, which is a specific. But when the Torah mentions the date, the Torah says it in the opposite way. It says the first day of the second month of the second year. So it should be the opposite. At first, it should say the second year, the second month, the first day. So it's reverse. So why, when the Torah says, why does the Torah say it in this manner? So the answer is that really, says the Or HaChaim, that also by the place that the specific is mentioned first and then the general. Why? Because it says, Hinei makom iti, because the place of Hashem is the place of the world, and the world is not his place. So really it's in the general. That first it says the specific, and then it goes to the general. It says, Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai wilderness in the Ol Moed. The Ol Moed is not more specific than the Sinai wilderness. It's more inclusive because it's the place of God, so it includes the whole world. That's the beautiful explanation of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. Another explanation comes from the Igra Dekawa. The Igra Dekawa says, it says that the Jewish, it says, at first it says, Daber Hashem Moshe Bemidbar. So the Jewish people weren't the general, and from the general they came to the specific at first. But over time, they learned from the specific many generalities. The Torah is so expansive that from the specific, we have all the generalities. So basically, the Torah becomes from a very specific to just this incredibly broad thing that's able to be inclusive of every single idea in the world. Find every idea from the specific concepts of the Torah. So the Torah is actually either, like the Or HaChaim HaKadosh says, the most general place or the most general and broad idea. These are some of the ideas. Now we go to Rav Naftali Rupshitz, the Rupshitzer, whose grave I recently visited when I went to Poland for Rabbi Melch's yahrzeit. The Rupshitzer says that, why does it say Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'Midbar Sinai? Ba katuv omar, the verse is coming to tell us that okay, he says something very, very deep. I'm trying to okay, he says the Torah is telling us that God spoke to us in the wilderness, a place. What's the wilderness? A place desolate, but more than just desolate. It's the place filled with terrible things. That it's the strength of the worst parts in the world. Like it says in Deuteronomy, chapter 8, that God led us through a place with fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, a place where there was no water. That is the power of the Torah, that the Torah could go to the worst places in the world and spread and go into the deepest and the lowest crevices and lift everybody up. And even the most diminished will be exalted as a result of the Torah. That's the power. That's the power of the Torah. Wow. Okay. Bemidbar, another idea comes from the Kotzker. We're going to say this from the Kotzker. Wow. The Kotzker is always, he's giving us the zingers nonstop. What does the Kotzker say? He says, He says, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to the sea ran away from God. As it says, Hayam Rav Hayanos. The sea saw God and fled. And so too, when God came to the mountains danced like gazelles. Ha'arim rachdu ke'ilim. So God came to the sea runs away. God comes to the mountains run away. God comes to the wilderness, comes to this place that was desolate, empty. What does the wilderness do? The wilderness runs out, greets him, and praises him. As it says, Yisu midbar yaronu yoshvei selah. The wilderness came out and greeted him. They exalted those who dwell in the rocks. Yisisei midbar v'tziyah. So, meaning to say, of all the imagery, only the wilderness came out to greet God, but not the sea and not the mountains. So it means, says the Kotzker, only a person who's like a wilderness is worthy that the divine presence should rest upon him and that he should benefit to the illumination of the Torah. Like a wilderness. Even if a person has studied a lot and worked very hard in Torah study, he should realize in his soul that he has still not yet come close to touching the Torah. Like a wilderness. That a wilderness is something that's untouched by the hands of man, that was never worked and never planted in the world. A person has to feel that way with respect to his knowledge in the world. We have to feel that even though we've worked hard, and even though we've studied a lot, we should feel that the Torah in front of us is like a wilderness, untouched, and we barely touched it. Like a person, like a wilderness, that a person who lives there has to lean on all of his strengths and to survive, and there's nobody to help him. That's what a person has to do. So there's two aspects of the wilderness. We have to feel alone vis-a-vis our relationship with God, and we also have to feel that in front of us, the Torah is like a wilderness, pristine, untouched. It's a very powerful message from the Kotzker, but I want to just end with one more, because I always love to quote Rameir Shapiro, who was a great-grandson of Rabbi Melech, and Rameir Shapiro, who is the founder of the Daf Yomi, and he says the following. He says, in three words, in three things the Torah was given. Ba'esh, b'mayim, and b'midbar. The Midrash says the Torah was given with fire, Mount Sinai, with water, and the wilderness. The Torah, which was given to the Jewish people, was given on the condition that it's relevant for all times and all conditions. Whether a person by himself or whether with a community, everybody needs to dedicate our lives to it. And not just like a one-time dedication, but even when it will be difficult to live, a person has to dedicate completely to this aspect. That a person has to stand ready for Torah study and never give up. And this is our history. The history from the first Jew, from Avram, that his whole life was about studying the Torah of God, and also to our time. So what does it mean when it says the Torah is given three things? Be'esh. Abraham jumped into the fire in order to demonstrate his faith and belief in God. This is the individual dedication. B'mayim. This is Nachshon. Nachshon jumped into the water. And then after him, all the Jewish people jumped into the water. Dedication of the people. Bemidbar, the wilderness. This is the complete and always dedication. The Jewish people followed after Hashem. This is why it has to be 40 years, to go back to Josh's question, to demonstrate that our commitment to Torah cannot be just passing. It's a lifetime of commitment. If the Jewish people had just walked straight from Egypt to Israel, it wouldn't have shown the commitment that we need in order to acquire the Torah. I just want to say one last thing before we stop, because I need to run. But I want to say the holiday of Shavuos, which is a holiday about receiving of the Torah, is always important. But this year, it's so important, because this year the Jewish people were attacked on the Simchas Torah, on the day of the rejoicing of the Torah. So our holiday of Shavuos, which is about the receiving of the Torah, needs to be something that we put our efforts completely into the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Okay, I need to stop here because I'll tell you in a second.